For this week's project, I'm going to be building this arch-top built-in bookshelf. When I went out to the client's house to measure, I took some poster board with me to trace the shape of the arch. All the shelves are going to be lit up with LEDs, so to make a place to hide the LED strip, the outer trim needs to overhang the edge of the drywall about an inch. So I measured in from my scribe line to account for the inch and then measured for the thickness of the trim. Once I got the sides drawn in, I used a compass to transfer the shape of the arch down an inch and then again for the thickness of the trim. Then to find the angle between the arch and the straight leg of the molding, I used my straight edge just to connect the points. I used a razor blade to cut out the whole thing so I could apply it to my plywood to create a rigid template. I transferred the shape to my plywood and then went to cut it out. Since the miter is the most critical angle, I cut it first before heading over to the bandsaw. At the bandsaw, I made sure I left the line so I could further refine the shape by sanding to it. Since the shape of the arch is the focal point of the bookshelf, I took my time to get it as smooth as possible and to just the right shape. To be sure I got out all the bumps and dips, I used a little chalk on the edge to highlight where the low spots were and then just sanded until they all disappeared. Then of course to give it the thumb check at the end. If it feels smooth, it is smooth. If I would have cut the arch out of one piece of wood, it would have needed to be made out of a really wide piece, so instead I built it out of segments. As I put the segments together, I paid attention to grain direction so it would look like the grain flowed across the top of the arch. And before cutting the joinery, I did a test fit to be sure I had the right general shape. To join the pieces together, I used my domino and epoxy. In general, I find epoxy on a mostly in-grain joint is a bit stronger over standard wood glue. And of course, on anything that is a difficult shape to glue up, I use my favorite method, soft pine glue blocks with a little CA glue. When clamping it up, I clamped both sides to keep even pressure so it would dry straight and flat. A little tap and those glue blocks just pop right off. I sanded off any excess glue and headed over to the bandsaw to rough out the shape, being sure I left the line. I stuck the workpiece and template together with a little double stick tape and chucked up a pattern bit in the router. Even though I'm using a compression bit that is less likely to catch, I still start off cautiously away from the corner where it is most likely to catch, and just ease into the cut. Now on to making the sides. I milled to thickness, ripped to width, and cut the corresponding miter for the arch. To measure the length of the sides, I clamped a 90-degree scrap to the inside edge of the miter so I would have an accurate place to hook my tape measure to do the layout. I glued the bottom in on my layout line and then went up to the top with more pine glue blocks to glue the arch. Once it was dry, I cut it to length. Now on to building the shelves. I glued up 8/4 material and cut it down to the width of the alcove. Then I cut a dado down the side of each shelf that would act as a channel to slide over a cleat that would be attached to the wall to support the shelf. And finally, I glued on a front trim piece to create an overhang to hide the LEDs on the underside of each shelf. While I was in the shop building all the components, the client had their electrician come out and chase some wire for the lights and have their painter come out and paint the walls of the alcove with a metallic paint and plaster mix to reflect the light.